For our next lesson, we are going to create a contract. In this lesson, we'll discuss the contract wizard, the contract header, custom fields, alternative language, attachments, and obligations. To perform the tasks in our training today, you will need the contract manager permission found under contracts permissions. Here's the contract wizard that you're going to see when you create a new contract. First, you'll give your contract a name, and then you'll indicate the contract type. The contract type is going to tell us what kind of information is available to track on that contract. So they're a very powerful tool for reporting and managing contracts because contract types may drive workflow, custom fields and contract templates are configured to each contract type, and also as you select a contract type on your contracts, it just allows for consistency among all of those contracts, which is helpful for reporting. After you select a contract type, the wizard will expand to show additional fields. Here you can select whether or not you want to use a contract template, and if so, which one. You'll select the work group for the contract, and work groups, remember, is what controls who can access the contract and perform functions on the record. You'll choose what language the contract is in, and then you'll decide if you want to use a main document template from the library. If you don't select one here, you can always upload your own or choose one from the library later once you're in the contract itself. Once you complete that initial wizard and you're in the contract, you're going to see that along the left side, you have access to custom pages and fields, along with standard pages and necessary data. We'll take a closer look at this when we get into the solution. On the right, where most of the real estate is on the screen, you'll see the individual pieces of data being collected for each page. Something to note before we begin is that there are several different custom field options that can be configured and then used when creating contracts. We have single-line text box, multi-line text box, dates, tables, multiple choice checkboxes, yes/no radio buttons, number fields, and drop-down menus. These are all custom and configurable, so what you see in our training today may be different from what you see in your own environment, depending on your organization's needs. Just know that the functionality we discussed today should be relevant, even though the specific fields you see may vary from your site to mine. There are some helpful features that can be tied to these custom fields. For example, conditional visibility. I have an example here that shows you how this works. The first field on this custom page of my contract says that the risk of the contract is high. If the contract is indicated as high risk, notice there's a field below it that says I need to include some additional comments. But if I say the contract is low risk, then there aren't any additional fields to complete. This just goes to show how configurable Contracts Plus is. Administrators can clean up the end user experience so that contract managers only have to see the fields that are actually relevant to their needs. The alternative language screen is only displayed on the contract when the contract main document has alternative language clauses configured. If these are set up and configured ahead of time, you would see them here. This is a nice feature because contract managers can change the language of the contract with just one click here on this screen, saving time and reducing the risk of making any errors in the main document. A scenario in which we might use this is if we like the default language best for the severability clause, shown in this example, and then we send it off to our second party, but maybe they don't really like that language or they don't agree with it. What we can do is try the fallback option that we've configured before we accept or reject their language changes. Also know that you can have up to 3 fallback options for each clause. Another nice feature is the automated clause insertion. This molecule icon indicates that these custom contract fields are tied to alternative language and will use the automated clause insertion feature. The way this works is, for these fields, alternative language has been configured to link different variations of these clauses into the main document template. Each response choice for the field is tied to a different language variance of a clause. So the response I choose here determines which variance of the clause gets placed in the contract. That variance will automatically populate in the document when I select a value without me, the contract manager, even having to open the contract main document in Microsoft Word. Using this feature does require some configuration on the back end by an administrator, but it saves a lot of time for contract managers. We can also integrate with our e-procurement solution. If you're using that and you want to select commodity codes to put on the contract, you can add them. Now we're going to go into the solution and look at how to create a contract. Before we start creating a contract, let's make sure to check our permissions. I want to make sure that I have the ability to perform this task today. What I'm going to do is click on my user icon up here and view my profile. And then from within my profile, I'm going to go to permission settings, contracts, and I'm looking to make sure that I have the contract manager permission. And I see a green check there, so that means I do have permission to perform this task. If I did not have this permission, I would see a little red X there instead. So we're good to go. I'm going to go back to my home page. And now I'm going to navigate to the contracts icon, which is this little ribbon here. I'm going to navigate over to contracts and then create new contract. That's going to pull up the create a contract wizard, and I just have to give my contract a name and then select a contract type. Today I'm going to create a master service agreement. Notice that we have this type ahead feature. So as I start typing master service agreement, it pulls up an option that might be what I'm looking for. I'm going to go ahead and take advantage of that. Once I select the contract type, notice that the wizard expanded and now I have some additional fields to complete. That's because the contract type is driving which fields are available to be selected. So now I have the choice of whether or not I want to use a contract template or not. I'm going to go ahead and choose one. I only have one configured in my organization right now for the master service agreement. I'm going to go ahead and select that so that we can see some of those fields populate on the contract header and save me a little bit of time. Then I need to select which work group this is in. We'll say that today I'm working in the legal work group. That's going to restrict who has access to this contract. And then I have the option to use a main document template. I don't have to select one here. I could choose one from the template library later, or I could upload my own document. But what I'm going to do is go ahead and select a main document template now. If I wasn't sure what my options are, these magnifying glasses will pull up the search results for us. I see that I have two master service agreement main document templates. This is the one I'm going to go with. We're working in Keyside Solutions, so I'm going to go with Keyside MSA. And then I'm going to click Create Contract. And that takes me to the contract header. The left-hand pane here works similar to our other solutions if you are familiar with them. We're going to populate the information on the right-hand side of our screen, and once we have all the required fields completed, we're going to see these check marks turn green. As I'm moving along, if I save progress, it'll save the information on this page and keep me where I'm at. But if I want to move to the next page, I can just hit next, and it does save my progress before taking me to the next screen on the list here. I want to point out that contract information here, you might notice that it's indented underneath the header. That's because that is a custom screen that has been configured for this contract type, master service agreement. So an administrator in my organization would have created this page, we're going to look at it in a few moments, with some custom fields. They even came up with the name themselves, contract information, and so it's very configurable, and we're going to take a look at the custom fields that are on that page in a little bit. There are some things that have populated for us in the contract header. We have a contract number that was generated from a number wheel. The information that I put in the initial wizard is here, and I can change that if I need to now that I'm in the contract header. Jurisdiction populated for us, not because I entered that in the contract wizard, but because we used a contract template. So you might recall that the contract template has default field values filled out. So as contract manager, if pretty much all of our contracts take place in jurisdiction of North Carolina, that's just a field I can skip. I don't need to complete it because it's already filled out for me. Of course, I can edit anything that comes from a contract template. So if this is a one-off situation where maybe this time we're actually contracting in New York, I can change any field value that comes in from a contract template. It's just meant to save me some time. I want to talk about the e-signature feature. It's marked as yes by default. That's a general contract setting that has been determined by an administrator in my organization. So because it's marked as yes, I have this e-signature screen on the left-hand side, and I'll just show you what that looks like in a second. Let me save my progress. We'll take a look at the e-signature screen. This is where we can add signers and Currently, I have a signer for my first party in here already. That's coming in from the contract template that I was using. I've got my e-signature settings, and if I needed to add a signer, I could just click Add Signer, select if they're from the first or second party. We haven't chosen a second party yet. That's why I can only choose one from Keyside Solutions, but then we would select a contact and save our changes. I'm actually going to go back to the header, and I'm going to say no, we're not going to use e-signature on this contract for now, because when it comes time to the end of workflow, I want to make sure that you know how to manage your contract if you're not using e-signature, because there's a step that will not be automated. So I'm going to actually turn this off and say no, we're not using e-signature today. We also have this setting called Show on Supplier Portal. So there's a general contract setting that determines the default for our organization. Basically, this is asking, do you want to share this contract with your second party on their supplier portal? Currently, our organization default is yes. If maybe this particular contract I did not want to share on the portal, I could change that and override it to be no. But for now, we're going to go ahead and say yes, it's fine to share this. I also can add a summary here for the contract. Moving down the header, I have a section for contract parties. Keyside Solutions, that's where I'm working today, so that's our first party. And the contact and address have actually populated for me because of the contract template that I'm using. If you weren't using a contract template, these fields would be blank, but you could go to the Actions dropdown and then select Edit Contact and Edit Address in order to select that information there. Let's go ahead and add our second party. You should know that you can add as many first parties and second parties as you need to. It doesn't have to be limited to one of each. So if you needed another first party, you could just continue to add first parties from here. In this case, we're just going to add a second party. I'm going to search for Veridian Dynamics. That's the supplier that I want to contract with today. So I'm going to select them. And then the next step in the wizard is the option to choose a contact. I'm going to choose Ted Crisp. That information is here. Notice I can edit it if I needed to. And then next it's going to ask if I want to choose an address. And I have this permission, add address or edit contact is a permission that your user may or may not have. I'm just going to select this world headquarters. And now we're done. This little icon here indicates that this supplier does have a portal, so they would be able to see our contract if we share it with them. And it's not currently visible. We see a little red X here. And you might be wondering why that is, because we said we do want to share this contract with them. If I hover over this X, it'll tell me why it's not visible. And it's because our contract is not in a shareable status. An administrator in my solution indicated which contract statuses could be shared with our suppliers. And in this case, our contract is currently in draft, and that has been indicated as a status that cannot be shared with our second parties yet. So after we submit this for approval or later on in the workflow process, we might just see this little red X turn to a green check, and that's how we know that our supplier can see it. Down below, I have a dates and renewal section. This is where I can determine the time zone and the start and end dates. So maybe we'll say that our contract is due to start on August 9th. Update start date upon execution means that maybe this is a contract that's going to take a few weeks to be negotiated, and we want this start date to actually update once it's executed versus automatically staying static as August the 9th. So that's something I can turn on. For end date, we can have non-expiring contracts or evergreen contracts if need be. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and make our contract expire in about a year. Review dates, these don't drive a business process, it just serves as a reminder. So you will get a notification to come in and take a look at this contract. So it's really a helpful feature for long duration or evergreen contracts here. So a reminder that maybe in 6 months, we want to take a look at this contract again. In that case, we would say the review term is 6 months and there are 2 of them left. Renewals actually do drive a business process. We have to spell this out in the contract document. And so we're going to indicate here to make sure that Contracts Plus allows us to create renewals when the time comes. So I can go ahead and say maybe on this contract, I have 5 renewals remaining. We do want to go ahead and apply the price file with the renewal. That's an option that's determined by your business processes. Maybe each renewal term is 1 year long. And we also have the option to auto renew. Auto renew will generate the task of renewal for us. So instead of us having to come into the solution and manually select the button that says renew contract, the solution will automatically generate a draft of the renewal contract for us. Now, it's not going to automatically be approved. It would still require someone in my organization to approve it and take a look at it. But the initiation of the draft still saves us some time. So if we do select auto renew, then we also need to say how many days before the contract end date do we want that draft to be created. Maybe we'll say 30 days before the contract end date, I want that renewal draft to be created. I'm going to go ahead and click next. That's going to save all this information and take me to the next screen, which is that custom screen I was mentioning before, which is called contract information. On this page, an administrator in my organization created some custom contract fields that I need to complete. Any that are marked with an asterisk are required. And if you see the question mark, that indicates that there is some help text available. So I just clicked on that and it says if I'm not sure, I can email Joy in my organization. Now let's take a look at the conditional custom field visibility. Low risk is coming in. This field's already populated for me because of the contract template that I selected. So maybe most of the contracts in our organization are low risk. There's no fields I have to fill out based on that low risk. But if I select that this contract was high risk, notice now there's a required additional comments field. In our case, we're going to stick with low. I have a couple of other custom fields I need to include, like a checkbox, negotiation start date. This field's not required, but I can go ahead and fill it out. And then the contract cost. So we can also do numeric value fields. Maybe I'm not sure about cost per hour. That's okay because it's not required. Let's go ahead and click next. And because we selected a main document template in the beginning, we've got some alternative language that is configured in that main document template. Alternative language is a really nice feature of Contracts Plus. We have a couple of clauses here that are just standard clauses in our contracts, but they have options. So the definitions clause and the term and termination clause in my main document has a default language and then also fallback language configured. In the real world, the legal department would have pre-approved some language for a couple of choices here prior to our creation of this contract or even the main document template. An administrator put both those options into the template and they appear here. So if we were conducting review rounds or negotiating our contract with our second party, and maybe we want to change the language of our definitions clause, what I can do instead of having to go into the document, find the clause, and make physical edits to the language in Microsoft Word, all I have to do is select the fallback option and click Save. Now, temporarily you're going to see this Open Main Document button is unavailable, and the reason for that is because the solution is taking a moment to auto-generate that language update and replace the default language for the definitions clause with whatever our pre-configured fallback language was. After a moment, the Open Main Document button is available to be clicked again, and so I could download the document and view it in Microsoft Word. This actually creates a second version of our contract. So you can see that I could do that automatically with one click of a button instead of having to take the time to go into the document itself and make that language change. Below, I can also see that the solution is going to automatically insert the language for the low risk option because I selected that this contract was low risk on the contract information screen. That's that touchless insertion. Let's actually take a second and just jump back a screen here. I did want to point out that this molecule icon indicates that there is some automated clause insertion that is tied to this field. If I were to change my answer to medium risk and click next, we'll see that now the clause that's going to be inserted is the language pertaining to medium risk contracts. Administrators also can configure alternative language around jurisdiction. Because this contract is in the jurisdiction of New York, it's placing a clause with that New York specified language. Next, we're going to go to the attachment screen. The main document is my actual contract, and it's indicated by a crown here, so you can easily identify it if you have a long list of attachments on this screen. We have a couple of columns here, print with full contract and show on supplier portal. We'll talk about those in a moment. The version number, you might notice we have 3 versions, which is maybe surprising because we haven't even opened the main document yet. But keep in mind that we selected fallback language for our definitions clause. That was version 2. And then I changed the risk level of the contract, so now it's version 3. If I wanted to go back and view the previous versions, I can go to the Actions dropdown, Version History, and then they're all stored right here. You can see who made the change and when. There's a comment as to what change was made, and you also can compare version to version. So if we want to, we can select version 1 and version 3 and run a compare. And here's where I can see side by side highlighted what those changes are. So there's a change to our definitions clause and also a change to our risk level clause. All of the previous versions can be downloaded. They're just stored here in this separate area so that it doesn't clutter up your attachment screen. To add an attachment, you can click the Add Attachments button. That pulls up an overlay where you select the type, so you can include a link or have the solution create a blank Word document that you can just author right now. I'm going to go ahead and select a file. And here I have some properties. Do I want them to print with the full contract? What that means is when the solution generates our final PDF for signing of the contract, do we want these attachments to be included in that PDF, or do we want them to be separate attachments? If you want them to be part of it, you can say yes, and then you can also indicate the print order. So maybe you have a cover page and that needs to go first, or maybe you have an appendix and that needs to go last. Show on supplier portal. Do you want to share these attachments on the portal? You can say yes. We'll save our changes. And so now you can see the print with full contract and show on supplier portal option. Now, the main document docx version is not automatically shared with your supplier because the final PDF will be. So if you do want to share the working version, you can opt to do that, but by default, it's not shared. If you want to change any of these properties, you can go to the Actions dropdown and edit properties. And maybe in this case, I don't want this one to print with the full contract or be shown on the supplier portal. I can change that there. I also have a couple of other actions I can take here. So for the main document, I can unassign it as the main document. I can delete it. I can upload a new version. And I have those options on my additional attachments too. I can always upload new versions and replace the main document with them if need be. The last thing I want to mention as well is that you can have as many attachments on this screen as you need. There's no limit to the number of attachments you can have. The file size limit for each attachment is 50 megabytes, but you can have as many of those 50 megabyte attachments as you want. Finally, we're going to touch on obligations, where we can tie together some of the commitments that we might have during the contract's duration. So I can add a new obligation to this contract, or system administrators can place and then contract managers can access some commonly used obligations in the obligation library. So that'll save us a few clicks. I'm going to go ahead and add one from the library. Maybe in this case, I need to just add a certificate of insurance. So because an administrator added this to the library, some of the fields for this obligation are already populated for me. Of course, I could change them if need be. Maybe I need to change the description. I have the option to require documentation in order for this obligation to be complete, so somebody actually has to upload a copy of that insurance certificate. Also know that we have this prompt to create invoice when marked as complete option. So when you're configuring your obligations, what you can do is set it up so that the person marking the obligation complete is then prompted to create an invoice right away. An overlay will appear to create that invoice. In this example, I'm not going to choose that option because we're just doing a certificate of insurance. We don't really need to have an invoice created for that. But if you want to learn more about that, check out the online class titled Managing Obligations and Contract Requests. For this specific obligation, the administrator who configured it in the library said it was a one-time obligation rather than recurring. But what I can do is change the date here. So maybe it's required by the contract start date. Maybe it's a certain number of days after the contract end date. In this instance, I'm just going to go ahead and say on the contract start date, but feel free to explore those options and find the one that best suits your needs. We also can set a due time as well. If I click next, I can see the owners and stakeholders. Again, I've got some defaults in here from the contract obligation library. I have a first party owner who's just the contract manager, an unnamed person, but whoever is named the contract manager is the owner of this obligation. I can also add new. So maybe I just want to add someone in my own organization who is a stakeholder on this. I can pick a user by name, like Brendan Durden, and I could even indicate some notes for him. And then I can save and add another. And in this instance, I want someone at my second party to be aware of this as well. So I'll select which contact I want that to be, and I'll go ahead and save. And then below that, we've got this advanced notice setting. So how many days in advance do I want to send the notification as a reminder about this obligation? The defaults in my organization have been configured as 60 days for the first notice, then 30 days, and then 15. If I don't include one of these fields, then that just means we're not going to send a notice. I'll go ahead and save those changes. And now I can see this obligation has been added to the contract. The default view is to show the recurring obligations as occurrences, but if you just wanted to see a series view, if you had an obligation that was recurring, you would just see that series listed here instead of the individual dates.